Thanks for coming along to this talk. This was originally billed as best practices for APIs from Apigee, and we wrote a bunch of books about that, so I thought, why not talk about something different, a bit more apt for this audience. So just to say, if we were giving out APIs for Dummies, which is pretty basic, but actually not a bad book. And certainly quite useful to give to business types that don't understand APIs. You can download it from our website, and I'm going to put these slides on SlideShare and tweet about it later. So yeah, you can just click and download. If you really want best practices, we have a book called The Definitive Guide to API Management, and that is the go-to book about all things API management, and really recommend you check that out. And a bunch of other ebooks which are on our website. Apigee decided a long time ago that as a small vendor, we're never going to be able to create the marketing buzz that some of our massive competitors are going to do. So we said, let's lead with content instead, because our content will always be talked about. And so that's what we focused on. As we talk, I would love you to interact with me on my Twitter, if you're doing Twitter, or hurl abuse, and I'll answer you later as well. So if you're too shy to stand up and ask a question, you can at least tweet me. I'm almost more public. So before I dive into use cases, what I thought might be useful is kind of sort of backtrack and ask the question, why APIs in the first place? And if you were in my talk a little bit earlier, you'll probably, some of this material will be similar, but we'll get on to the interesting stuff. And I should say, because this is use cases, I would love you guys to say stuff to me if you disagree. So please feel free to stop me as we go along, or we can ask questions at the end. But if there's a particular thing I'm talking about, or I know banks are also super secretive and financial services is super secretive, but if you have a perspective, I would love you to share it with the audience while we go through, because I think that's where the real value comes if we're interactive. So APIs are part of this trend. In Apigee we talk about digital and digital transformations, and it's really because as this sort of transformation happens and comes through various industries, the easy ones first, like music, the difficult ones like mining might be harder to do a digital disruption of mining, but every industry is being affected by it. And actually this wave, as it comes through, is kind of reflected in the customers that Apigee has. So our retail customers and telco customers, we've got a whole long list of those, and that's because their industries were disrupted first, right? I mean, if you look at Amazon and eBay, they've been around for quite a while now, and they've done a significant amount of disruption. Companies haven't adapted. Blockbuster is dead, right? There's going to be more in these industries as we progress, and I don't know if there's going to be a bank that will end up being totally disrupted and dead, but there's a chance. There's a really big chance. So there are some who just don't change. There's some who will adopt the technology, and there's going to be some new ones, and there's also going to be some who are just the sharks that continue to move, never stopping, throwing the old stuff away, and just being sort of super adaptable to their environment. What I would say is we kind of broadly talk about digital natives. These are typically the disruptors, and a lot of the fintech startups and the payments guys, and a lot of the people speaking at this APIdays conference are really those digital natives. And then you have sort of the digital immigrants, and hopefully most of you will become digital immigrants as time progresses, and you'll learn from those who've gone before you. I asked this question earlier because most of you, if you're from a bank, are at least 100 years old or longer, not you, but the bank. And as you think about your business and you think about building a platform out of your business, and in fact, the previous talk about Open Bank project is all about building a platform out of your bank, right? That they're enabling you to become a platform, and in some ways maybe commoditizing you, because if you don't provide it and some other vendor does, they get the whole app ecosystem that's built on open bank project, potentially. But what do you have, right? So, well, we talked about it earlier, but it's quite obvious. It's your data, right? And that's why Open Bank Project has been built as it is, because they somehow allow you to get your data out and then harness an ecosystem on top of it. So if you can liberate your data, and you can build an agile platform technology and create a vibrant developer ecosystem, you can have a platform business. And I think that's what you want to do, right? I think personally that if banks and financial institutions get the value of the data that they've got locked away that they can't even internally access, but if they can really harness it, they could generate businesses that are probably going to make 10 or 20 times as much money as they currently do today. But unlocking it is going to be the hard thing, and it may be that as long as they can surface it, someone else will unlock the value and they can just become a participant, creaming some of the money off of that. So that's the idea. When we talk about APIs, in Apigee we always talk about having an intelligent digital business platform layer. It's a big, long mouthful of words, but we chose each single one of them for a reason. The problem is that every layer you've built is being built for a generation of technology and for doing its job in a really excellent way. But when it comes to APIs and digital and sort of building things in the rapid, innovative world that we're sort of moving towards, they're not built for the speed and agility. So, Gartner talks about bimodal IT, Twospeed IT, architects talk about pace layering. So we would posit that adding this additional layer in here for a super agile, sort of consumption-focused, API consumption-focused layer will actually allow you to move faster. And as you build these APIs in here, you'll be able to have this API fulcrum that you can harness to catapult yourself forward without having to speed up this stuff. Because I don't know if you guys, I've tried to speed this stuff up for a long time, and it's hard to make it go faster. Yeah, and some people achieve we've gone to quarterly releases instead of 6 monthly releases, and that's a big thing, right? But in here you're talking about days. And so this is the idea, right? All of this is built for a specific use case, and it works really well. Open Bank Project didn't try and tackle your core banking systems, right? They looked at the edge of the enterprise and or the bank and the finance institutions, and that's what you need to sort of start to do as well. So really, this is where we're going to talk about some of the trends. This is consumer banking focused, but I think pretty much these have the same kind of, these are the same trends for most of finance. And then from these trends, we're going to sort of jump into use cases. So the first one is around changing consumer behavior. I mean, I think that all of you guys know this, right? I mean, even my mum and dad are using their phones and doing cool stuff with their phones that they wouldn't have done, and they're definitely not digital natives, right? But I think the scary thing for most people is I look at my nieces and nephews and how they use this and even touch my computer in a different way. They're touching the screen, they're not touching the keyboard. So there's some major trends that are happening, and the expectation from consumers has really changed a lot. And I don't have to tell you a lot about this because you guys know probably more, and the business guys. I think, is everyone here IT, or is there any business people here? That's one business, 2, 3. So are you guys the ones clamoring for the IT guys to hurry up and speed up and deliver me this cool shiny thing that I need to give? Yeah. So IT should start to say yes a lot more. The next thing is good news. We got a little bit better at writing software. We can write software faster now, especially when you talk about, not necessarily in the old systems we had up before, where you can speed that up to a certain extent, and DevOps starts to help that. And certainly, renovating the core is a really important part of what we do. But at the same time, the systems of engagement, the app tier, the web tier, we can build stuff really fast now. Actually, it's amazing the technologies that we have. And you can build stuff to an API. We've actually seen customers where the front-end team and the back-end team are building to an API, and the front-end team are using a set of mocks, and they were ready weeks before the backend team had actually built the API that they needed to call. So much earlier that they actually went live with mock data, right? The customer didn't fully know it was a recommendation API, so they just kind of got the same recommendation every time. And then eventually when the backend kind of caught up, they were able to stick their true recommendations in. But this is the kind of thing that sort of APIs allow you to do, is harness this agility that we have in application development. So again, the Twospeed IT concept. And I think the other part is, I talked about some statistics earlier about the number of banks that are currently sort of have the mass market share in the UK. It's around 4 or 5 banks that pretty much own the market, and the number of banks that are currently in the process of getting approval as to become a bank and have a banking license. So there's about 4 or 5 banks, and there's about 29 in the pipe to come along, right? And they all want a piece of the pie. So there's a real threat of substitution. Fintech here in London, you know, this is a really hot spot for it. Probably some of the people in here are part of that disruption. So really looking forward to seeing what you guys do. But this is a definite mega trend. Technology, the devices, not only I think, obviously mobile we talk about, but how does Internet of Things affect banks and finances and all that kind of stuff? How do they plug together? And then, just in terms of like the new language that allows you to do and develop something faster than you've ever done before. These are all, sort of really interesting things that are happening. And finally, privacy and security. I think that this is still there. It's always been there, but it's got a bit bigger, because if someone does hack your API and you're a bank, and they get access to all of your data like they did with the Ashley Madison thing, which was pretty frightening for some people who are cheating on their spouses. Imagine what it would be like if finances got, if my finances or your finances got hacked into. This is pretty much what keeps you guys all from doing anything right now, right? Because, if we do this, then we're really stuffed if it goes wrong. So, these would be the big trends. I think there's a couple of ways or strategies that people have adopted, and we see this when we talk to you guys, and I've seen this a lot. So infrastructure and security, when you have thousands of developers or hundreds of developers, you need a more agile way to deliver the infrastructure to them. And so we're seeing now the move from virtualization to infrastructure as a service. Things like PaaS, software-defined network, software-defined data center, all of this stuff, which is around basically infrastructure agility. Next sort of big theme, data and analytics, big data, Hadoop. Basically actually trying to unlock some of the data that you have. The next big trend is this whole agile delivery model, Twospeed IT, DevOps, the whole way that people are responding to trying to accelerate getting stuff out the door. And then this whole concept around digital foundation and key capabilities. I think this is actually a lot of API stuff in here, right? That's actually, whether it's internal or external, API architecture basically starts to address all of these, and we'll talk about it. And I would really love to get your feedback on some of this as well, if you guys have got a point of view. Is that okay? Anyone got a point of view already? Very shy people. So this is going back to the last slide around the strategies. This is the value proposition that APIs have to some of the parts. So, obviously, keep going on about it, but obviously accelerating digital development, Twospeed IT, building your, interesting, I really like the open bank concept, and I hope it kind of starts to proceed, because if everyone has similar APIs, it becomes easier for apps to talk across multiple different banks, and as a consumer that can only be a good thing, right? So again, having your API as a channel that you can actually use, both talking to partners as well as talking to consumers, would be a really powerful thing. So I wanted to show you something here. Apigee, we talk a lot about the digital value chain. And how many of you guys have seen the digital value chain before? Any hands? Cool, only a few hands. So this is the way we see the kind of value chain going from a user, a consumer, all the way into your back-end systems. In Apigee, we like to look at it from this side. But I know that most of you are kind of thinking about it from this side, right? So you're all part of this closed world of ecosystem of stuff here, and you're trying to figure out, I built all these amazing SOAP services, and that kind of hide my horrible, green screen mainframe backends and FTP stuff that's going on, and there's all sorts of crazy weird and wonderful stuff going on in here, and then someone comes along and says, well, and you built a mobile bank on top of it, or you built a web app on top of it for internet banking. You've built a mobile app on top of it, but it's still this massive big ball of interconnected madness, right? And so when we look at it, we say, well, actually, you need to decouple all of this, and APIs is kind of like the fulcrum to do that. And if you're coming in at this world from purely the back end, every API that you build will be super complex, right? I gave the example before about a telco, Swisscom, who've been going on this digital journey for a little while, and their first attempt at an SMS API was 60 fields long in REST, when actually all you care about is, I want to send an SMS to somebody with this message, right? That's 2 fields. And so the danger is, if you think from the inside out, you're going to overcomplicate things. If you look at this digital value chain and you overlay it into your business, what's really interesting is you can sort of cut this digital value chain in different ways and think about it in, so for example, in this, all the way along here, this is actually B2C, right? Business to consumer. If you think about it from here, this might be B2B, talking to partners. And I think, how many of you guys have had to deliver APIs to a partner, or being asked to deliver an API to a partner? Anyone? Yeah. And how long does that take? Anyone done it in less than 3 months? Okay, 2. Oh, yeah, open banking. You can't stick your hand up and say that. You guys should. How many have done it in less than 6 months? You had 3 months. So, yeah, so 3 to 6 months, right? Man, that's way too slow, because the business is asking for you to do that every week, right? So you do need a different level of speed. And then I think for me, this is actually the most interesting use case. The internal users talking to the same API, whether that's sort of B2E, building apps for your end customers, which are employees, or actually separate internal applications. And as we move towards microservices, this use case starts to proliferate, because the number of APIs that you're building in a microservice architecture proliferates even more. So really start to apply this digital value chain to everything you do. And we have a whole bunch of ideas and strategies that we kind of overlay on top of it. Obviously, we care about the API platform, but there's a bunch of different strategies and rapid prototyping, minimum viable product. The whole way that you harness and build on top of this digital value chain is really interesting and quite exciting, actually. And this is why I enjoy working at Apigee, because of the kind of conversations we have with customers who, I've worked in IT for a long time, and it's exciting when you work with APIs, it's exciting because it's really the meeting point of the business and IT together, and the kind of use cases and things that we do are really fun. And it's great because you see it, you can actually explain some of what we do. APIs are a bit complicated for family members, but the end result is pretty obvious to them, right? So I guess the simplest and first thing that comes to your mind when you think about APIs, and the first use case I wanted to talk about in detail, is basically the systems of engagement, right? Talking to the end consumer, this is kind of like, this is kind of like the sexy end of APIs, right? This is whether it's sort of outside-in transaction banking, robo-advisors, all of these APIs that you can kind of build at the edge of your enterprise, that you can then build these clever systems of engagement on top of, the web apps, the mobile applications. This is where the first level of sort of use case that I see people doing. Sadly, not as much as you'd like. And what I've seen a lot of is when people have built APIs around this for the sort of systems of engagement right out there talking to the consumer, it's still a SOA system that just does some final little bit of resty stuff at the end, and it's still a big ball of mud, and it's still a monolith, and it still takes 1,000 people to do it, and it's like takes forever to deploy, and rollback is like just mind-blowingly difficult, if at all possible, and P1s happen all the time, and people are like doing crazy stuff. It's really, really hard. And so we would say that, if you do it, that's the first learning, right? And then you realize, oh crap, I've got to decouple all these layers, right? I pull them apart. So that's the first use case we see. And the people who are doing this are thinking about building an API platform. They're thinking about their business as a platform business, right? So they're going, I'm going to have some secure and controlled APIs here, and I'm going to maybe harness the fintech ecosystem, external developer communities, other financial institutions. We've been involved in some really interesting use cases between financial institutions and telcos, because it's really interesting when one of the really interesting use cases that we've heard about is apparently a lot of fraud happens where people call up the bank pretending to be me, trying to change my mobile phone number. And so if a bank can verify with the telco that this phone number that you're changing to is tied to the identity of me, then they can cut down on fraud, like huge numbers of phone calls they can cut down on. So there's a real value in actually, when you think about yourself as this kind of platform, you can gain real sort of synergies with telcos. Obviously, telcos also want to figure out a way to harness their data. They're thinking about it exactly the same way, and they're having the same problems as you are, but they're being disrupted a little bit faster and sooner than you are. So there's real value in thinking about yourself as a platform and thinking about the different communities that you're going to be building around. Payments, I'm not going to talk a lot about payments, because payments is like another sort of, there's a lower barrier to entry to get into payments than there is to being sort of a bank. And so what you've seen is the disruption has already started happening and has been happening for a long time. It's really interesting to see PayPal, one of the first disruptors, being disrupted and having to acquire again just to get themselves back in the game. A lot of what we do in Apigee is actually, if you look at sort of our financial services customers, the ones we can talk about, a lot of them are in this zone, right? Because they're, again, if you're sort of the earlier you are in that sort of disruption cycle or wave, the more likely you are to be an Apigee customer. So going back to the internal API economy stuff, what does this mean? If you think about, and this is the use case that I'm the most excited about, because a lot of the guys that I've talked to are not ready to expose a lot of APIs to the public. They might be able to build some APIs to partners, and they might, based on business demand, start to build APIs to maybe for a mobile or for their website, but they're not really ready to just open the doors. And regulation will eventually bring that in, and some innovation will bring it in. But I think the internal API economy, when you have a bank with hundreds, thousands of developers, how many apps do you have? Hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands? I mean, sometimes you don't know, right? This is where the real power of, you can start the experimentation safely internally and start to harness this whole API economy internally. And I actually couple this with, not only with the idea of having APIs that other teams can talk to and sort of the proliferation of apps that can be built onto it, but I believe that the open source principles that are sort of taking over software in terms of how software is being built in open source communities should also be overlaid internally within a bank. So the source code should be available to me of someone else's app. Because if someone else's app is doing something that I needed to do something else, and they said to me, well, hey, you know, it's not on our roadmap or whatever, I should be able to make a contribution to it to make it do what I need to do. And that should accelerate innovation internally. And at the same time, if I can also then talk to a bunch of APIs, I can mash up stuff that from different sort of app providers internally or API providers internally that couldn't have been possibly made or built before. It's going to have interesting consequences internally. So for me, this is the really interesting one. I talked about this earlier, but this is a virtuous cycle. At the beginning, it's pretty slow. Getting the bits in place to be able to do this require you to think a lot further down the road and start putting the platforms in place to be able to do it. The first APIs take a long time, and then this wheel starts to turn and turn faster and turn faster. Culture starts to change. Culture is the hardest thing to change. But if you can start to turn this wheel, it's kind of like, you know those really big tractor tires that are, when you're a kid, they seem impossibly big, and even now they still seem like way taller than me, right? Try turning one of those. Just turn one rotation. It's really hard. If you keep going, you get to the point where you can just sort of tap it, and it has unstoppable momentum. And I think that this is kind of like the internal API economy could have the same kind of productivity boost. The problem is that you guys are still kind of trying to implement, more rapid infrastructure to be able to do this on. You're trying to figure out how we do automation and DevOps. You're trying to figure out all these other things at the same time, but they're all tied together. And as you get that ball sort of, the sort of wheel just turning a little bit, you'll gain momentum. You'll get faster. Ultimately, you still have that data, right? This is the one thing that everyone competing against you doesn't have, and they're trying to get access to. Danger is if you don't start pushing the wheel now, you'll be too far behind by the time you need to do it. This is a really interesting use case for me. When I talked about all this infrastructure stuff that you're building, and you're building massive, sort of software-defined data centers, and vendors have sold you a bunch of shit, and you have to stitch it all together, and you maybe decided that, well, we weren't going to buy one SDN controller from one vendor, we're going to buy two because we want to hedge our bets, and actually, the OpenStack API that we got, that, VMware sold us this thing that we can just stick on top of our virtualization, and then we can use OpenStack API over here, and we're experimenting with Amazon API over here. You end up with a lot of APIs, and you definitely don't want to expose those APIs to your end customers within the bank directly, because you have a lot of security concerns. These are just a few. You also have a lot of functional concerns as well, not beyond like, can this person call the API? And by the way, the API that this, like an IaaS, like OpenStack exposes, it can plug into your authentication systems, but can it also do intelligent filtering, like, does this person actually have access to this resource? So if you build an API facade that, to all intents and purposes, exposes exactly the same API, right? But it does some magic as well to check and do some mediation before talking to different systems. It could even do an intelligent choice. It could say, expose an OpenStack API, because that's the API we use internally. But actually, if we see that this is a dev environment, we're going to call AWS, and we're going to provision this in AWS instead. You can start to do really, really interesting things with an API platform in place just in front of your infrastructure. And for me, this could be kind of quite a powerful sort of thing you could do relatively easily, and just as part of the existing programs that you're doing already. So I'm really fascinated by this. I'm really fascinated by the whole disruption of DevOps within organizations and the culture. So how are we doing for time? Wow, I've got loads of time. So next use case goes back to data, talking about monetization. You're probably not ready for this yet, but you might want to do this internally. Even just having an internal charging model. Let's think about this way. You might have systems that you use internally that are actually gold dust, right? I think RBS, or one of the banks recently, did something where they have an app that can help you around, I don't know, finding like best mortgage prices, or best like house prices in different areas or something. And they have this bunch of data. One of the banks, I think, does is they have this bunch of data which they can use in the consumer-facing apps to mash up with other information and provide real value. And there's actually probably hundreds of silos of data that you have internally that you could monetize and sell to even other fintechs, right? And they can probably do a better job of surfacing that at the end of the day and dealing with consumers than you could. I know how good are banks at building consumer-facing apps. They're getting better. So there's a lot of different models that you can build around this. And, you know, we're still seeing people starting to adopt this and experiment with this, but monetizing what you've got it's what the business guys want to do, but it may not be, you may not be prepared to do it yet, but this is certainly a really huge use case. And I can see this almost becoming you know, the kind of the thing that will give you the 10x growth in your revenue if you can do this well as a bank, because this is your data. And if you can figure out a way to monetize it. I mean, for example, think about it another way. I might have a really awesome, you know, well, let's say awesome back-end banking, core banking system that's been developed over many years, and it can work in any geography, and it can deal with all the complications of every geography. And obviously, I've built that, you know, over time to handle every single eventuality. But man, my internet banking kind of sucks, and mobile app just about works. But what if I was to say, create a bunch of APIs using maybe Open Banking Project or some other APIs, exposing everything, and then allowing a virtual bank, like, you know, telcos have virtual network operators, having a virtual bank sitting on top of on top of all of this. I can start to harness that, because the core is what I have, and they might generate, you know, a lot more customers, and I can get a cut of every bit of their business. You need to start thinking about it in terms of APIs. The final thought, there's a couple final thoughts I have on this. Have I missed any use cases? Good question. These are the core characteristics when you think about your API initiative that you need to really have baked into your plan, or it's probably going to fail. And this is kind of hard-won lessons from an API platform vendor. These are the things that over the last 9 years, our customers have told us we need. So I think the first one is self-service and ease of use. No matter what you build with APIs, if they have friction in them, they're not going to take off. Remove friction. And friction means, like, if you have a sign-up process for your APIs that involves somebody filling in a 10-page form and putting way too much information in it just to use the sandbox of your API, you failed, right? Because they're never going to use it. I am never going to do it. You try doing it yourself. I can give you a few different developer portals of different companies that have got this kind of process, and it just stops innovation because they'll go to your competitor who gives you that. Self-service also applies internally, right? If you have a developer who wants to use a particular API and they sign up to use that API, it should be a pretty seamless process for them to get access, because, you know, they might do some cool stuff with it. And anyway, you can control it, right? Because you give them access to Sandbox, and that sign up just gives them access to that, and you have your own processes to go live into production. Multi-tenant, you know, one of the things is you need to think about building this, you know, the concept in your mind needs to be a platform. And when you run a platform, you know, think about it. Google's architecture is very simple. They have guys that look after boxes, and they do that really, really well. And they run that like a platform. And then they have guys that run the OSs on top of it and the virtualization on top of it. They do that really well. And they think platform, 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 each layer of the stack. You need to think about it like that from your API perspective as well. And multi-tenant is a really crucial part of it. If you have a lot of different isolated silos around, you know, of installations of your API platforms, what you're going to end up with is the same problem that you have with databases. right? Same kind of thing. You don't know how big your system is, your APIs are going to scale. You don't know how things are going to take off, in which direction they're going to go. But you need to be able to scale, and you need to be able to do state. Scale is easy, and you guys all do it. I mean, can't hesitate. I know that you've got tens of thousands of VMs, and how much physical machines have you got? That's scale, but to do state, to handle transactions and statefully do it, it's really tough, and you need to think about that from the beginning. I'm not going to say too much about security because you guys get it, and probably the number one thing that's holding you back from actually doing stuff. Think like a cloud provider. This also goes back to multi-tenant. Whether you're using a public cloud or a private cloud, think like a cloud provider internally. And this is a really interesting one that we go on a lot about, configuration and code. So if I can build something, drag and drop, and change 2 variables, that's configuration, right? For 80% of my use cases, I should be able to do that. But for that last 20%, building the configuration to do it for all those edge cases is really complex. And that's where you need to be able to do code, right? So configuration and code are really important. What this talks to is, not only is the software and whatever you're using on this API layer to do that needs to have that, but at the same time, everything you build has to have these same concepts built into it. You've got to think more like the cloud SaaS providers than you've ever done before. So stepping up to platform business, where do you start? How do you start? We like to talk about this a lot. Project, program, platform, right? You've got to start somewhere. Pick a project. I like to think that you all have something in your head that some guy is clamoring for this API to be opened up to somebody else, and you pick it and you go for it, right? If not, and there are some people who may be struggling to think, yeah, but how do I do, who do I do this for? For me, I actually think that in IT, we can just be focused on our own, world. Most of the budget of IT, as every vendor will ever tell you, is 80% of your budget is going on keeping the lights on, and 20% is for innovation. And business has all the budget. Well, go to the business and ask them for some ideas. And they say, well, what are the ideas that you've been asking for? Pick one and try and build it for them. You're going to maybe fail, but you say to them, guys, we said we're going to do some experiments here. Let's do another one, But find some little wins. I really think sometimes the simplest API can make you a massive win. I talked about this recommendation API earlier, and how the front-end guys built something and ended up going live with the sandbox still in place. But a recommendation API is not a very big API to build. But you could build something like that. You can incorporate it into your website. The web guys can use it. There's a whole bunch of ideas you can come up with. Over time, projects, you flush out 2 or 3. You start to do more. It becomes a program. And then when everybody starts thinking about it, and you gain more and more successes, and you're gaining that momentum, and the wheel's starting to turn, you have a platform. And it might be that it takes a long time. It's nothing that, I guess, no vendor. You guys are pretty battle hardened as well. No one's promising you the earth, but this is how it kind of change happens. And what we see with our customers who are really successful is that they gain this momentum internally. They don't give up the first time that they fail, because minimum viable product, experimentation, innovation. Nobody said innovation was like waterfall, right? So just going back to the formula, I've got a few minutes, and I'd love to hear what you guys have to think. Any experiences trying to do this internally? Any other use cases I missed? Sort of open floor for you guys. And I think there's a microphone. Silence. Am I going to get Twitter abuse then? Is that everyone's on their thumbs?
Thank you for the clear explanation of how you get from a project to the wheel that goes on. It's very clear. You just glanced over the aspect of security. So based on your experience as Apigee, as somebody that deals with such large customers, is that a secretive thing, or do you also contribute to that aspect?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, definitely. So, when I talk about all this, I think basically, if I look at, all the features we have, tons and tons and tons of that is built around security. And a lot of the work we're doing is not just, the boring stuff like, yeah, we can do OAuth and all these kind of, security protocols. And yeah, we penetration test our platform and all the rest. But we're actually starting to think about security from another perspective, which is we're a cloud provider. We have a lot of data. Some of our data is really interesting because our customers get hit by bots all the time. So now what we're looking at doing with our data is to say, well, okay, let's look at our data and let's build bot detection algorithms that are smarter than what anybody else can build, right? So when we talk about security, it's something that we deeply care about because you wouldn't have the list of customers that we have using us if we didn't have it. And we've ticked the boxes, and every time we have these discussions with banks, we have to tick the boxes again. And we're used to like 1,000-question security questionnaire from the security team, right? But we're actually starting to take our sort of thoughts about security to another level around, eventually everyone's data is going to go through an API, and we're going to have to start thinking about automatically detecting security breaches before our customers even detect it. Kind of think about it like a web application firewall on steroids, using the data of every customer that Apigee has. Yeah, really interesting stuff. Is that? Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks.
Cheers. Yeah. Pass it around. We've got time.
The two-speed IT model that you spoke about becoming very popular. How do you see that your customers are resourcing the higher speed side of it rather than the legacy side of it? Are they retraining staff from their legacy engineering teams, or are they staffing it in a different way? Or what's the mindset about how you engineer in that space, and where do you get the resource from?
First things that people do is they just change people's job titles. So personally, I'll give you my perspective. I don't know if it's Apigee's perspective. I think that some people can make the leap into the other side of the speed of IT, but I actually personally think that there's actually a good place for everybody in the two-speed and even the digital value chain, because the back-end systems are never going away, and their importance of having to be reliable and up and doing transactions and without failing isn't changing, right? So the people who are good at that have developed that experience over many years, and those are awesome skills. At the same time, there's some people who are just super geeky, who will always adopt new technology, and they can make the leap into, and for them it's always interesting, and they will just personally just gravitate towards the cool stuff, whether it's Docker or AngularJS, JavaScript, Node.js, whatever the current, Go, I don't know, Rust, whatever the current latest thing is, right? So I think that you've got to kind of keep the teams separate, put APIs between them. Everyone's got pressure to speed up. Even the back-end guys are going to have to speed up, and I think they're going to have to change too. And then my other thought on this is that Conway's Law is really valid. I don't know, you guys know about Conway's Law. Organizations build software in the way that they're organized. So if you're one big monolithic organization, everything's super complex between everybody, then that's what your software is going to look like. Right? So, and if you're built more, if your teams are smaller and they're built, like the sort of, I think it's Netflix or someone said, software team can never be bigger than 2 pizzas. The team has to be able to eat 2 pizzas and no more, or 2 pizzas need to feed them. So, I think for that faster side, you do want to have a different organization. And what we see is people even have different offices, right? Personally, I think, oh, yeah, we're going to do agile and we're going to do DevOps. Let's remodel the office is kind of a bullshit answer. But that is often the first thing that people do as well. So, yeah.
Discussion.
Yeah. That wasn't being recorded, was it?
So I got a bit of a broad question maybe. This talk was about API management, right? And I tend to like to believe that API management consists of certain tasks or activities. So how would you describe API management?
So API management means different things to different vendors, depending on what their software capabilities are. I think it's the first answer, right? So everyone will try and move the definition based on what they do. What are the core capabilities? So first of all, you need, it's really broad. How am I going to break this down? We don't think about things as just an API gateway. We don't think that an API gateway is just what you need when you're talking about API management. An API gateway does things like throttling, rate limiting, quotas, security, API keys, all of that. That's one part of it. We think that there's another part of it, which is you need to do some kind of lightweight transformation, not to compete with ESBs, but when you're building an API gateway, you need to do some kind of transformation from like even SOAP to REST, or changing some values in a call, or reformatting the output for a different device. That's all really kind of table stakes again in an API gateway. But then you have when you start to build that, and we put that in place, the next thing you need is analytics. Right? You need to be able to know what's going on. Who's calling it? Can I end of life this API because it's not being used anymore? And that's again just table stakes, and that's sort of analytics and the whole understanding what's going on in the beast. And the third part of it is when we talk about this developer ecosystem, you need to build services for developers, like a developer portal. You need a way for developers to view the documentation, play in a sandbox in the same page, sign up to be able to get a key, register the APIs, and even see their own analytics for what they're doing. And so that's why we talk about a platform. And if you go back to the slide on the digital value chain, we believe that a proper API platform addresses every single persona in the digital value chain. And if you're only just talking about one aspect of it, you have an incomplete solution. This is 9 years of experience, and it's kind of why I came to Apigee as well, because it was a really, really compelling proposition that Apigee has.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, all the things you just mentioned, I think belong to API management, so I would love to hear some best practices about that. Of course, this talk was interesting.
Yeah.
But
go and get the book.
I hoped for, but maybe after the
yeah,
we'll just have a chat after this one.
I would encourage every single one of you. We just came out with this new book, and well, I'll just see if basically at the beginning, and I'll post this on Twitter, and the slides will be up online. The Definitive Guide to API Management is a huge kind of authoritative book that we've just published quite recently on this, and it basically distills all of our thought leadership around all the best practices and what you need to do and everything else. It's pretty comprehensive. So, I mean, I didn't want to just do a book to you guys.
Thank you.
Yeah, cheers.